Hey, I got a question for you. Have you ever been sitting in church before, or in a Bible study, or maybe you've just been on the internet and somebody used some big fancy word about God or the Bible that you didn't know anything about, you never heard before? I have another question for you. Have you ever heard somebody say, we don't need theology, all we need is Jesus and his love, the love of God? Well, if you're wondering what the study of theology is, or what theology is, you've come to the right place, because today we are going to be answering that question, what is theology? So let's roll the intro and we'll go ahead and get started. By the way, what do you think of these glasses? I like them. Let me know in the comments below what you think, because I'm going to be making an addition right over there. So if you ever get bored or lonely or tired of looking at my ugly face, you can just look right there and look at those awesome, amazing glasses. Today, we're going to be talking about theology and answering the question, what is theology? Now, when it comes to theology, we run into a little bit of a problem when we try to define what theology is. And I know that when you talk to pastors and church folk and religious people, if you ask them a question, what is theology? They're going to give you a pretty simple answer. And that answer is this. They're going to say theology is the study of God. Well, the problem is really with the answer. First of all, the answer, that's the study of God, that answer doesn't tell us which religion that it is. It doesn't tell us which religion that they're talking about. Problem number two is that it doesn't tell us which God they are talking about. And problem number three, it doesn't tell us how many gods there are. Because remember, there are more than one religion in the world, and there's more than one God in the world in terms of literature. And I understand that in Christianity, we believe that there's only one God, and that God is Yahweh. And so from our perspective, God is the only God. But perhaps maybe you are Muslim, and you ask the question, what is theology? Well, this obviously changes your perspective. So therefore, you have to define the type of religion that you're talking about, and you have to define the God that you're talking about. Those are two things that you have to do before you can even ask the question, what is theology? And this is why things get very, very complicated, which is also why I said nobody knows how to define theology. Because it's not simple, and it's not as simple as saying, well, theology is the study of God. Well, if it's the study of God, then why is it that it doesn't tell us about the religion or the God or all the other gods? What exactly do you mean by God? So we have so many problems, and the difficulties, you think of it like a tree, actually. When you look at a tree, you get the tree trunk and everything, but then when you start digging down into the ground, what you realize is that there are roots, and those roots go everywhere. And it's really, really hard to define terms. And this is really the big problem of atheism. Because when you look at atheism, they have all of these theological questions. But yet, they try to answer those questions in terms of science. We'll come back to that in a couple of seconds. But before we get too far into this video, I just want to take about 20 seconds to tell you about my YouTube channel and why I think you should subscribe. First of all, this is a Bible study channel, and what we do here is study the Bible because we take the Bible seriously, and we seriously study the Bible. So if you are looking for a Bible study that's online, it's absolutely free. You just found it, and you can go ahead and click subscribe. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, my name is Adam Jorden Clark, and I publish a brand new video every single day. So click subscribe and the bell notification. Let's get back to the video. But just understand what I'm trying to tell you. Is that one theological question will lead to another theological question, which will lead to another one and another one and another one. And before you know it, you have thousands and thousands of questions, and you might not have very many answers. So if you're just a person sitting in church or a Bible study, or you're just a curious person on the internet, and you said, hey, what's theology? And you decided to Google it or something, well, congratulations, you just asked your first theological question, and from here on out, you're going to ask a lot more. Primarily because you watched this video and I just put a whole bunch of stuff in your head, and now you're going to be thinking about that stuff. But to come back to atheism just for a couple of seconds, what you have to understand something, we really need to understand something about theology. That theology is not just a study of God, right? It's not as simple as saying, okay, well, I'm Christian, so that's my religion, and I believe in God, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, and so therefore I'm going to study that God. That doesn't really work. Because again, you're going to have question after question after question after question after question, and more questions. And a lot of those questions you won't be able to answer. And no one else will either, okay? And so that tells you something very important. It tells you that theology is not necessarily a study, but theology is more like a way of thinking. And so we can really compare theology to philosophy, because nobody really knows what philosophy is. All we know is that philosophy is just a way of thinking. Likewise, theology is, in fact, the study of God, but it's not really the study of God. It's more of a way of thinking about God. And so if we define it or come to understand theology as a way of thinking about God or gods or many different religions for that matter, what we begin to understand is that we can think theologically about a lot of problems. So one common problem in Christianity is predestination. We have one group of people who say, oh, God predestines everything, and then we have another group of people that say, no. Well, which one is it? Well, is that the right question to ask? Perhaps there's many more questions that we can ask. And this is really what a theologian does. He looks at these types of problems and says, well, there's all kinds of other possibilities because they're thinking theologically. Likewise, when it comes to atheism, what you have to understand about atheism is that it's a theology. Atheism isn't really a belief, even though it is a belief, but it's primarily a theology because they're dealing with God and they're dealing with religion. Now, of course, they are a lack of belief or a lack of religion, or at least that's what they claim. But you have to understand something, that in order to become an atheist, you have to be some type of a theist. You have to affirm some type of theistic premises or accept those theist premises about God. But thereby doing that, you can turn yourself into an atheist. It's very interesting. So in other words, if somebody starts out Christian and they become atheist, it's because they were a Christian that turned them atheist. Very complicated process, but when you begin to think about that theologically, it starts to make sense. They had something wrong with God, or their ideas weren't compatible with this Christian God, and so therefore it led them to the opposites. Well, if they never started out with theism or Christianity, would they have become an atheist? Very interesting thing. But I think the big problem with atheism that really needs to be unearthed, if you will, is that atheism is a lot like looking for a chainsaw in the refrigerator and you're expecting to find it behind the jug of milk. In other words, what I'm saying is this. Atheism is a way of thinking about God. It is a theology. You're theologically thinking about God. But the problem is they have all these theological questions, and yet they go to a totally different field, which is natural science, to try to answer those questions. Therefore, they're looking for a chainsaw in a refrigerator, and nobody puts a chainsaw in a refrigerator. Because anybody who's ever read the Bible knows that God does not exist inside of this universe. He lives outside of the universe because apparently he's the one who created it. Well, if he lives outside of the universe, then therefore there's no evidence inside of the universe for God. And if you're only looking inside of the universe, how will you ever prove that God's real? It's pretty circular. And for people who claim to be, so rational, and I'm not trying to be mean here, but atheists pride themselves on being rational, you really start to think about some of the stuff they believe. It's a little bit circular. And of course, Christians are no different, so there's plenty of fingers to be pointing around here. And that's why theology is so important, because theology is not just nonchalant, let me make stuff up. That's not what theology is. Theology is a way of thinking, and I want you to understand that I'm using the word thinking in a rational sense. It's when we literally sit down and we think about God logically. We think about God rationally. So what we do is we look for evidence, and then based on that evidence, we try to make logical conclusions. So we ask the question, who is God? We have to ask the question, is it even possible to know God? People say, well, the Bible is revelation of God. Well, how do you know that the Bible is revelation of God? Can you prove? Is there evidence? Can we prove that there is revelation in the Bible of God. How could we ever know that? This is what I mean by thinking theologically. So you have to understand, when we ask the question, what is theology? We're not just looking for a simple definition to say it's the study of God. It's much, 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 much deeper than that. Theology is a way of thinking. It's when we look at evidence and we try to build conclusions rationally, logically, looking at stuff and evaluating and observing and saying, well, what about this and what about that? Sometimes you can get very, very, very detailed in your work. And you could look at one God, and you could look at another God and compare them. Look at similarities. This is really fun to do in the Old Testament because the Old Testament tells us a lot about other gods. And what we can actually do is we can look at this God in that culture, and we can look at this God in these cultures, and we can kind of compare them, and we can look at similarities and dissimilarities. For example, the story of Moses in Exodus. Very famous story. I'm sure you've heard it before. You get to the part about the 10 plagues of Egypt, and each one of those plagues represents a god. Well, these gods are telling us about the culture. They're telling us about what ancient Egyptians believed, ancient Egyptian gods. So there we have 10 extra gods in the Bible mixed in with God. So now our understanding of the story really begins to open up. Is this really a story about Moses against Pharaoh and letting God's people go? Or is this a story about superiority of gods? Well, you let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think about that story, and if you ever want to read it, it is in the book of Exodus, so I highly encourage you. Read the book of Exodus and come back to this video and comment and let me know. Listen, if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment below and let me know about what you think about God and these other gods that are mentioned in Exodus. I got some more playlists up here, some really cool videos on the Bible, because that's what we do here. We study the Bible. Don't forget to click the big red A and subscribe to the channel because I publish a brand new video every single day. My name is Adam Jordan Clark. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.